There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical labor, but from the collision of minds. It settles in your chest when you realize the person across from you isn't listening. They're waiting for their turn to speak. It's the quiet frustration of watching someone dismiss complexity for the comfort of certainty. Or the hollow feeling when your carefully chosen words bounce off walls of willful ignorance. Carl Jung understood this dance. He saw how intelligence isn't just about knowing more, it's about holding space for uncertainty, for nuance, for the uncomfortable gray areas where most of human experience actually lives. But what happens when that expansive mind meets one that has closed its doors? When depth encounters surface, when curiosity meets rigid thinking? This isn't a story about superiority. It's about the profound loneliness of seeing clearly in a world. There's a moment that arrives quietly, often in the middle of an ordinary conversation, when you realize you're speaking different languages. Not French versus English, but something more fundamental. You're speaking in questions. They're speaking in answers. You're exploring. They're concluding. You're holding complexity like water in cupped hands. Call this the burden of consciousness, the weight that comes with seeing the world as it actually is, rather than as we wish it to be. It's not that intelligent people are inherently better. It's that they've developed, often painfully, the capacity to hold multiple truths simultaneously, to sit with uncertainty, to question their own assumptions even as they form them. The recognition hits differently each time. Sometimes it's gentle, like watching someone dismiss a piece of art because it doesn't immediately make sense to them. Other times it's sharp, cutting through the air when someone confidently states something demonstrably false, then refuses to consider evidence to the contrary. But perhaps most difficult is when it comes wrapped in aggression, when ignorance isn't passive but militant, demanding not just to exist, but to dominate the conversation. You learn to recognize the signs early. The slight glazing of eyes when you mention something that requires context they don't possess. The immediate pivot to personal anecdotes when you're trying to discuss broader patterns. The way they use volume to substitute for substance, confidence to mask confusion. These aren't character flaws, they're defensive mechanisms. Ways the mind protects itself from information that might require it to change. But here's what Jung understood that many miss. This recognition comes with its own trap. The trap of superiority. The seductive whisper that because you can see something others cannot, you are somehow fundamentally different, fundamentally better. This is where many intelligent people lose their way, where understanding becomes judgment. The truly intelligent learn to hold this recognition with humility. They understand that their ability to see patterns, to think systemically, to embrace nuance, came from somewhere. Perhaps genetics, perhaps environment, perhaps the particular combination of experiences that shaped their neural pathways. They didn't earn it through moral virtue. They inherited it through circumstance. Yet this understanding doesn't make the loneliness any less real. There's a particular isolation that comes with being the only one in the room who sees the elephant, not because you're special, but because you've learned to look. You find yourself translating constantly, simplifying your thoughts not to condescend, but to connect. You learn to hide your depth the way others might hide their wealth, not from shame, but from exhaustion at having to explain it. The recognition also brings responsibility. When you can see systems others cannot, when you can predict patterns others miss, when you can hold complexity others find overwhelming, what do you do with that sight? Jung believed consciousness itself was evolution's gift to humanity, our ability to step outside ourselves and observe. But gifts come with obligations. Some intelligent people retreat into echo chambers, surrounding themselves only with those who match their intellectual frequency. Others become teachers, endlessly trying to lift others to their level of understanding. Still others burn themselves out, attempting to force insight where there is only resistance. But Jung suggested a fourth path: acceptance without resignation. The recognition that different minds serve different purposes in the human ecosystem. That not everyone needs to see what you see, understand what you understand. That intelligence without compassion becomes mere cleverness, and wisdom without humility becomes dangerous. The weight of seeing clearly is real. It can feel crushing when you're surrounded by those who prefer shadows to light, who choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. But this weight isn't punishment, it's invitation. An invitation to understand not just the world, but your place in it. Not as judge, but as witness. Not as teacher, but as fellow traveler on a path that happens to offer a clearer view. The recognition marks the beginning of a longer journey. It's the moment you realize you're carrying something precious, your capacity for deep thought, for nuanced understanding, for holding paradox without breaking. The question isn't whether this burden is fair or unfair. The question is what you'll do with it. The seeds of intellectual difference are planted early, often in soil we never chose. Jung understood that the mind's architecture begins forming long before we're conscious of the blueprints. Some children learn to question. Others learn to accept. Some are encouraged to explore the spaces between certainties. Others are taught that uncertainty is dangerous, that not knowing is failure. Watch a child encounter something they don't understand. One might poke at it, turn it over, ask endless questions that adults find exhausting. Another might glance at it briefly, then move towards something familiar, something safe. Neither response is right or wrong. They're different strategies for navigating a world that often feels too big, too complex. The child who questions learns that the world is layered. That surface appearances often hide deeper truths. They discover that asking why can lead to fascinating rabbit holes, that admitting ignorance is often the first step toward understanding. But they also learn something more difficult, that questions aren't always welcome. That curiosity can make others uncomfortable. That seeing too much can set you apart. The child who accepts learns different lessons. They discover that certainty feels safe, that having clear answers reduces anxiety, that following established patterns leads to social approval. They learn to value stability over exploration, comfort over growth. This isn't intellectual laziness. It's often emotional survival, a way of managing fear in a world that can feel chaotic and unpredictable. Some minds naturally move toward complexity, drawn to paradox and nuance like moths to flame. Others naturally seek simplicity, order, clear categories that help them organize reality into manageable pieces. Neither approach is inherently superior. They're different tools for different purposes. But modern life often favors one over the other. Our education systems reward quick answers over deep questions. Our media promotes certainty over nuance. Our social structures often punish those who think too differently, who ask too many uncomfortable questions, who refuse to accept simple explanations for complex phenomena. The divergence deepens with each passing year. The questioning mind encounters ideas that expand its capacity for complexity. Philosophy, science, art, literature that teaches it to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously. It learns that truth is often contextual, that wisdom lies in understanding the limitations of one's own knowledge, that the most profound insights often emerge from embracing uncertainty. The accepting mind often moves in the opposite direction, seeking ever simpler explanations, ever clearer categories. It learns to distrust complexity as confusion, to see nuance as weakness, to view those who ask too many questions as threats to stability. It builds walls rather than bridges, choosing the comfort of ideology over the discomfort of inquiry. Divergence isn't inevitable, but it's common. Jung observed how people tend to strengthen their natural inclinations rather than develop their weaker functions. The naturally intuitive person might neglect practical skills. The naturally thinking person might ignore emotional intelligence. Similarly, Those drawn to complexity might lose touch with the need for simple truths. With a complex mind, uncertainty becomes a playground, a space full of possibilities to explore. For the simple mind, uncertainty becomes a threat, something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. These aren't just different opinions. They're different cognitive architectures, different ways of processing reality itself. The tragedy isn't that minds work differently. It's that we often interpret these differences as character flaws. The complex thinker sees the simple thinker as lazy or willfully ignorant. The simple thinker sees the complex thinker as pretentious or unnecessarily complicated. Both miss the deeper truth, that their minds were shaped by forces largely beyond their control, that their cognitive styles serve different purposes in the human. When you realize that someone's rigid thinking might stem from early experiences that taught them flexibility was dangerous, their resistance becomes less personal. When you understand that your own love of complexity might have emerged from circumstances that made questioning safe, your intellectual gifts feel less like achievements and more like accidents of fortune. The distance between minds isn't a problem to be solved. It's a reality to be understood. Some gaps can be bridged through patience and skillful communication. Others are simply too wide, requiring acceptance rather than effort. The wise person learns to distinguish between the two, to invest their energy where connection is possible while finding peace with the distances that remain. The origins of these differences matter not because they excuse behavior, but because they explain it. Understanding doesn't mean accepting everything. It means responding to reality as it is rather than as we wish it were. And sometimes, the most intelligent response is simply to recognize the limits of intelligence itself, to understand that not all minds will meet. Not all distances can be crossed. Not all differences can be resolved. The human brain wasn't designed for the world we've built. It evolved to navigate small groups, immediate dangers, simple cause and effect relationships. Yet here we are, asking it to process infinite information streams, abstract concepts, global interconnections that span decades or centuries. It's no wonder that some minds adapt better than others to this cognitive overload, that our brains are remarkably different in their fundamental architecture. Some develop thick neural highways between regions, allowing rapid cross-talk between logic and intuition, memory and imagination. Others build more specialized pathways, creating minds that excel in specific domains but struggle with integration. Neither design is flawed. They're different solutions to the puzzle of consciousness. The Dunning-Kruger effect reveals one of the cruelest ironies of human cognition. Those who know the least are often the most confident in their knowledge. This isn't stupidity in the traditional sense. It's a predictable failure of metacognition, the brain's ability to think about its own thinking. When you don't know enough to recognize the boundaries of your knowledge, those boundaries become invisible. Confidence fills the space where competence should live. This creates a particular kind of frustration. They've learned, often painfully, that expertise brings humility. The more you know about any complex subject, the more you realize how much you don't know. Your confidence becomes calibrated to your actual competence, creating what Jung called learned uncertainty, the wise person's comfort with not knowing. But here's what makes dialogue so difficult. These two cognitive styles don't just disagree on facts, they disagree on the nature of knowledge itself. The overconfident mind seeks certainty and finds it easily, even where none exists. The calibrated mind seeks understanding and finds mostly questions, even in areas where they have genuine expertise. They're playing different games by different rules. The person who regularly engages with complex, ambiguous information develops stronger connections in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for abstract thinking, impulse control, and holding multiple ideas simultaneously. The person who prefers simple, binary information strengthens different pathways, ones that favor quick decisions and clear categories. These aren't just intellectual differences, They're physical differences in brain structure. The complex thinker's brain has been trained to find comfort in ambiguity, to seek patterns across seemingly unrelated domains. The simple thinker's brain has been trained for efficiency, to sort information quickly into familiar categories. Both brains are functioning exactly as they've been conditioned to function. Jung's theory of psychological types adds another layer to this neurological foundation. He observed that some minds naturally move toward external data facts, evidence, observable phenomena. Others naturally move toward internal patterns theories, possibilities, abstract connections. When these different orientations meet, they often speak past each other completely. The internal mind says, "Consider the implications." The external mind values concrete evidence. The internal mind values logical consistency. Neither is wrong, but they're solving different puzzles with different tools. The external mind wants to know what happened. The internal mind wants to know what it means. Add emotional processing to this mix, and the complexity multiplies. Some brains integrate emotion and logic smoothly, using feelings as additional data points in decision-making. Others compartmentalize these functions, treating emotion as interference with rational thought. When an integrated thinker encounters a compartmentalized thinker, the compartmentalized thinker hears this as weakness, as fuzzy thinking. The compartmentalized thinker might say, "The emotions are irrelevant. Only the facts matter." The integrated thinker hears this as coldness, as missing crucial information. But perhaps the most significant difference lies in what neuroscientists call cognitive flexibility, the brain's ability to switch between different conceptual frameworks. Some minds develop high flexibility, able to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, to see situations from various angles. Others develop strong focus but limited flexibility, excelling within familiar frameworks, but struggling when those frameworks prove inadequate. This difference becomes crucial when facing novel problems or conflicting information. The flexible mind asks, "What if I'm wrong? What am I missing? How might someone else see this?" The focused mind asks, "How does this fit what I already know? Which of my existing categories does this belong to?" Both approaches have value, but they lead to very different conclusions. Jung understood that these cognitive differences weren't accidents. They were evolution's way of ensuring human survival through diversity. We need both the cautious mind that preserves useful traditions and the adventurous mind that explores new possibilities. We need both the focused specialist and the integrative generalist. The problem isn't that we think differently. It's that we've forgotten how to value these differences. The science reveals something both humbling and liberating. Our intellectual capacities aren't moral achievements. They're largely the result of genetics, early experiences, and thousands of small choices about how to use our brains. The person who thinks rigidly isn't necessarily choosing ignorance. Their brain might literally be wired for certainty over complexity. Understanding this doesn't excuse willful ignorance, but it explains why changing minds is so much harder than changing opinions. The cruelest battles are fought not in the external world, but in the quiet spaces of your own mind. You sit across from someone spouting confidently incorrect information, and inside you, two voices begin their familiar war. One whispers with compassion. They're doing their best with what they have. The other sees with frustration. How can they be so willfully blind? This is the intelligent person's daily crucible, the space between understanding and enduring, between empathy and self-preservation. Jung recognized this internal conflict as one of the most exhausting aspects of consciousness itself. To see clearly means to see not just what is, but what could be. It means holding the painful awareness of potential unrealized, of conversations that could be deeper, of connections that could be richer. The compassionate part of you knows the truth. That person's certainty might be their shield against a world that has proven unpredictable or threatening. Their simple answers might be the only way they can function without being overwhelmed by complexity. Their resistance to new information might stem from a lifetime of learning that change is dangerous, that admitting ignorance leads to punishment or shame. But the frustrated part of you rebels against this understanding. Why should you constantly translate your thoughts into simpler forms? Why must you always be the one to bridge the gap? Why should intelligence feel like a burden rather than a gift? This voice whispers seductive thoughts of superiority, of justified irritation, of the right to simply walk away from those who refuse to think.